Hi everyone, I'm Kaya, and to give you a bit about my background, I first got it started with iOS, actually making prototypes at Time Inc. for Entertainment Weekly, and around that same time, I started to create We Read 2. And in 2014, I launched the first version of We Read 2. And after that, I worked on notifications at Mint, and then accessibility at Apple, and now I'm at Slack, working on notifications and accessibility in our core product team. So a bit about Slack. If you haven't heard of it, Slack is a communication platform for work, and we have about 8 million users. We have about 3 million paid users for our enterprise and Slack apps. So here's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about notifications, the problems that come with implementing notifications, the idea behind a diagnostic tool, and what the tool actually is, how I built the tool, and then lastly, some takeaways. So let's start with notification pitfalls. This is how notifications are supposed to work. It's supposed to be very simple. You have your server, which then sends a notification payload to Apple's push notification service, which then goes to the device. Now, if it actually worked this simple, I probably wouldn't be giving this talk right now. Here's more of how it actually works. I don't expect you to be able to read this diagram. It's very overly complex, but this was a diagram created a while back talking about how we actually send notifications at Slack. So as you can see, there's a lot of steps and processes that we actually go through in order to decide whether or not to send a notification. Okay, so the idea behind creating a diagnostic tool to solve this problem that we have with notifications. We started to think, what could stop a user from receiving a notification from Slack? First could be Slack notification preferences. So in Slack, we have a lot of custom notification preferences which the user can decide whether or not they want to receive a notification. Then, of course, we have the system notification settings, where you go into the settings app and then set your notifications on or off, or sounds or badges, etc. Then we have push tokens, which are essential for every app to have in order to send a push notification to an iOS device. And then lastly, it could be a bad network connection. If it's any of these, it's going to cause us stress, basically. And oftentimes, the user doesn't know which is actually the particular issue that's stopping them from receiving notifications. Okay, so this is what we used to have in Slack. And if you currently have the Slack app, this is probably what you would see. So you go to your settings in Slack, and then you click on notifications. You see this button that says, send me a test notification. And the idea behind this was basically to allow the user to see if they can receive notifications. But the issue is, if they click on this and there's an issue, they have no idea what the issue is, and they're just going to write into our CE team, right? So what does this lead to, this scenario where there's no information on what the issue is, and we just expect the user to write into our customer support team? It leads to this, an onslaught of customer support tickets in Zendesk. So with this feature that we've had around for a while, users would test it out, it would say there's an issue, and they're going to send into CE, I'm not receiving notifications. They have no idea why, and it causes a lot of problems for our customer support team. And that's not cool. This is not fine. We shouldn't have this repeated issues coming to our customer support team, and also the repeated frustration coming from our users. So this is where the idea behind the diagnostic tool came from. One of our back-end engineers went through 6 weeks worth of those Zendesk tickets. He looked at exactly what the conversation between the CE agent and the customer was and what the actual problem ended up being. He then categorized all the different problems. And in doing that, he realized that there's 2 things that can probably solve majority of these user tickets. One being in-product education, and the other being token refreshing. So in-product education. This in-product education means providing the information in the app so that the user can self-diagnose and fix their own problems. And how does that help? Well, we really love our customer support team. And in doing so, it makes their job easier because they won't get the onslaught of repetitive issues. All right, so what does the tool actually do? I've talked a lot about, the idea behind it, the problems that we have, but what is a diagnostic tool? What would it do? So this is the tool we came up with. The tool has 4 checks. The first being Slack settings, which are your customized settings that you set within the app. The second being device settings, which we set in the settings app for iOS. The third being token registration, which is related to the token refreshing problem that we mentioned earlier. And the fourth is that send me a test notification that we had previously as our only way to kind of self-diagnose a user problem. And I'm going to go through each in detail and talk about how I implemented it. All right, so actually building this tool. Building the tool, these are the 3 things that I thought about the most. Swift enums, reactive programming, and of course UIKit. All 3 allowed me to create a modern diagnostic tool. Now for those who are less familiar with Swift, an enumeration defines a common type, a group of related values, and allows you to work with those values in a type-safe way. If you worked with C before, you're probably familiar with C enumerations, but those have to be defined with an integer value. Swift enums are more fluid, so they can be a Swift, they can be a floating point, they can be an integer, or they don't have to be a defined type. Now, reactive programming. This talk is not about any particular library or about which one's best, but just the general idea. Programming with asynchronous data streams. And the only thing you really have to understand about the implementation for this talk is that a stream is a sequence of events which a subscriber can listen to. All right, let's get into the implementation details. So this is the enum that I created to use to keep track of each test in the tool. So each test has a particular state. It's either not started, running, it's either succeeded or failed. And in order to keep track of that, each test has an observable state. So they all start with not started. And on the data source, I'm listening for the changes. That way I can update the table view accordingly. All right, let's start out with the Slack settings. In order for this, we need to check 3 particular things. Within Slack, there are 3 ways you can customize your notifications. You can snooze your notifications, right? Turn them off for a short amount of time. You can set Do Not Disturb for a repeating amount of time every day, right? So here, I set mine from 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. so that I don't receive any notifications after work. Or you can turn them off totally so that you won't ever receive notifications. We really hope you don't do that. All right, so the actual method that I created to check for each of these 3 custom settings. And I'll go through it line by line, but as you can see, it's relatively simple. First, I grabbed the dependencies and the team, which holds all the information for that particular user and the settings that they've set for the particular team that they're currently active on. Next, I check if they have Do Not Disturb or Snooze on for that particular current team. Then, I check within their notification preferences if they set Slack to off. Using those, I then set the enum value for the state observable to either failed or successful. And once I set this, then the subscriber, which is listening for the state observable, will automatically update the table UI and show the user if the test has passed or failed. Like so. So if the test has failed, this is an example of what the user will see. We'll tell them that they've chosen not to receive notifications from Slack, and then when they tap on it, it will lead them to their notification settings, which they can then fix. Right? This allows them to self-fix their problem without having to go to our customer support team, which would then ask them to check their settings, and then they would have to come back, and instead of creating that back and forth conversation, they can just change it within the app. Next is device settings. So this method grabs from UN Notification Center. I'll go through again line by line so you don't have to look at the whole method. First, we're going to get the UN User Notification Center, and we're going to call Get Notification Settings. And in this completion block, we'll be able to access what the particular settings for Slack that user has set. So we want to check if they have alerts off, or badges, or sound. You may notice that I have another observable for each one of these. And that's because for the actual text that we put in the table view cell, it has to match to whether alerts are off, badges are off, or sound is off. So I also keep an observable so that the subscriber can know which text to actually set on the table view cell. So using this, I'm just checking if each of these are disabled. And if any of them are disabled, I will then set the device settings observable value to either failed or success. And if they have any of those off, this is an example of what the user would see. So token registration. We noticed in a lot of the tickets that we're getting, a lot of users were having invalid or old push tokens. This can happen for many different reasons, but you usually only get a new push token when you launch the app for the first time or you install the app for the first time. And if you have an old token, we won't be able to send you any pushes accurately, right? Because the push token is what we then send to our servers, which they use to send the notification payload to APNS. So this part is very important. And this part of the diagnostic test actually will be automatically fixed for the user. There's nothing that they can do to actually fix this setting, but in running this test that I'll show you next, it automatically fixes it for them. So how do we do that? The first step is to call register for remote notifications. And register for remote notifications triggers at a system level that we want from Apple them to send us a push token. If it succeeds, it'll trigger this system method, did register for remote notifications, which sends us the data that contains the actual push token. And in this method, we get the push token and we would then send it to our push servers, which they then use to send the notification payload. But if it fails, it triggers did fail to register for remote notifications with error. Now, you may think, how am I actually keeping track of whether it failed or succeeded, because these are system level methods? Well, and this is where I use NS Notification Center. And NS Notification Center allows you to post notifications anywhere in your app and listen for them. So in our data source, the same one that's keeping track of our test, I look for the notifications that I post within these methods, and if I receive any of those notifications, I then set the state observable to failed or success. Lastly is the test notification. This is actually something that we already have in the app, but with given all the information before, it should succeed if there's not anything wrong. And I'll go through how this actually works. First, we want to check if alerts are on at the system level. And in this, we can actually use that state observable that I talked about before that keeps track of whether alerts are on or off. If alerts are off at the system level, you won't actually be able to see the notification visually. And the whole purpose of the test notification is to show that visual notification. So if they have alerts off, we won't even try to actually get a test notification because it defeats the purpose. And we'll let the user know that that is why the test notification is failing. Now, if alerts are on, we pass that check. Next, we actually have a Slack-only API endpoint, which we call, and once we hit that, we're going to wait to receive the notification from the server, which has a particular category, and we're able to handle that notification and handle foreground push with payload. Right? If you receive any notification while the app is foregrounded, you'll hit this system method in the app delegate, and we then format the test notification. After a certain amount of time, though, we know that we never received the notification from the server, and this failed. Okay, so quick overview. We have these 4 tests, each of which we're checking within either the Slack settings, the device settings, or trying to refresh the token for the user, or trying to send them a notification. By separating out all these different checks, it allows the user to either fix their problems on their own or give CE more detailed information so they're able to fix their problem faster. Okay, some takeaways. So you may be thinking, well, I don't use notifications in my app, but there are other things that a diagnostic tool can actually be helpful for. The first being if your app has a lot of custom settings. So if your app has a lot of custom settings related to notifications or not, that may make it hard for the user to understand how they're actually interacting with the app or something's not working as it should. It may be useful to create a diagnostic tool for them to be able to understand what their settings are and be able to self-diagnose and fix those problems. Second is introduce complexity with dealing with third-party services. So for us, with notifications, we're dealing with APNS, right? There could be ongoing issues with APNS that we don't know about, but by having these different tests and checks, we can surface those issues to the user. So if you're using some type of third-party services that may be causing issues between the user and interacting with your app, you may want to have some type of tool where they're able to understand or surface those issues. And lastly, think about your customer support team. If you notice your customer support team getting repetitive issues over and over and over, you may want to create some type of tool where users can either quickly understand what's going on or even a simple button or a simple label in your app to have some information within your settings to let them know what's going on without having them go to your customer support team, on a repetitive basis. This really makes your customer support team's lives easier. I've collected some resources here. You could take a picture of this link that have information about links to enabling push notifications for your app, more information on Swift enumerations and reactive programming. Thank you, and now I'll take any questions, any information you want to know about, why this tool is important. The tool is actually being released this week. It's released on Android already, and so now we're already collecting data from our users to see how well it's going and how well our users are liking it. So any questions? Feel free.
So when you reported that your customer support was receiving a lot of tickets, like tickets per 1,000, users, what was that number like? Is it like?
So notifications actually, that's a really good question. So out of our monthly, Zendesk tickets, in which we get in the thousands, notifications was taking up like 30 to 40% of that. So we were noticing that constantly, people are reaching out to our customer support team over and over about notifications, some type of issue. And we wanted to really help them solve that, but also make the experience better for our users,
Could you put up that link again? Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
My Face ID never recognizes my face in time. So with this new tool, were you able to better debug the underlying issues that were causing problems with notifications? And were there any common issues do you think we should be aware of that you found?
Yeah, push tokens were definitely the one of the number one issues that we were having. We had, once we started refreshing these tokens, and we did an experiment where on the actual back end, we got rid of a lot of stale tokens and refreshed it, and we noticed that deliverability went up in a large percentage for us. And we talked to other companies as well in their notification teams, and they said as well, push token refreshing was one of the number one problems that they had. I think there was also a lot of misunderstanding with users with our custom settings, right? So they may snooze or D&D and not realize it, and then reach out to our customer support team. And our customer support team kind of has a script that they, send, check this, check this, check this. And we realized, wait, with this tool, that's literally the checklist, and the user can do that on their own, right? And so with this, yeah, we have found that it's helped with deliverability as well, because once we're able to actually diagnose these problems and the users are receiving notifications again, it'll help with us getting them to them.
Yeah, so I was wondering what was the thought behind showing the word token for a user probably doesn't mean very much. how was the consideration there? Like, how much information do we show the user? And yeah, what was the thinking?
Yeah, that was a big one. You know, we talked a lot with our product writers on figuring out what's the right language to use because we didn't want to be too technical, right? It's not great to assume that your users are also engineers. So with the token registration, excuse me, we left it pretty much at that. We didn't want, we kind of dabbled around with some different ways to say it, but at the end of the day, because that's a check that is either passes or fails and the user can't do anything about it, we figured, okay, it's all right if we use the word token. But for the other ones, we wanted to make sure really to be very careful with the language, like Slack settings, so it's like very clear, and device settings, to make it very clear that way. And I think when you're creating a tool like this, if a lot of your internal settings or custom settings that you have are highly technical, I think it's really important to partner with like the copywriters to figure out the way to actually say it to your users in a way that they'll understand and a way that they'll be able to actually understand the issues that they need to fix on their own, right? Yeah, so that was a really hard part. We played around a lot with that. Token registration was kind of the best that we came up with. Most people, I think, even people who don't work on notifications, don't even know what push tokens is. So like, yeah. I think once I even demoed to my own team and like explained it, then they're like, oh, okay. So yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Do you guys use PushKit? And also, if you are not using PushKit, how do you measure delivery success rate? Because push notifications don't seem to wake up the device reliably.
Yeah, well, we don't use PushKit. We track deliverability using beacons. So, we track metrics within the app. What we actually do is we use a mixture of the notification service and user defaults, right? So in the notification service, once the app triggers the notification service, once it receives the notification, we then write to user defaults that the notification was delivered. We also send a beacon to our metrics tracking, our data warehouse, and then we use that beacon to keep track of push deliverability.
Last call for one more.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the decision to use reactive programming. It looked like that was RX Swift that you're using. Yeah, I was just curious, like how much of that is being used in the Slack app right now?
It wasn't RX Swift, but I'm not going to talk about any particular libraries. I think at Slack, we're working hard to make our app more modern, and I think using reactive programming, especially in an app that we are always getting new data in, is really important with performance and also just having the user interaction, and we're trying hard to really keep up with that. We're not using RX Swift, but we are using the reactive programming paradigm all throughout our app.
So I guess no more questions. That's it. Thank you very much.